Guten Tag, everyone. Yeah, good to see you. We are going to be talking today about the origins of the World War One. Now, if you remember, we've been talking about the progressive movement and the age of imperialism and the Gilded Age. And the times that we've been talking about primarily has been running from about 1870 with the Second Industrial Revolution all the way up to about 1914 with the age of imperialism and the progressive era. Now we're going to start taking a look at the time 1914 to 1920. And the 1914s to the 1920s, we're going to look at all of this because we need to see a bit more about this business regarding the World War One. And the World War One happens from 1914 to the 1918. And the fun thing about the World War One is that America doesn't get involved until the 1917. So we have to understand why the world goes to war, and then why does the United States not join until 1917. So that's the plan anyway. Now, hopefully we should be able to at least make it pretty clear as to why these nations would go on this war, and how America is going to get involved, even though it's going to be 3 years after the war starts. So that's the plan anyway. Let's see what that's going to look like. So we've got a couple of key essential questions that we're going to be covering here today. We're going to be taking a look at what causes nations to go to war. Specifically, we're going to be looking at ideas. We're going to be looking at alliances. We're going to be looking at arms races and something called self-determination. At its beginning, here is what the world looks like in 1914. It's a world of empires, right? Let's not forget that fact. It's a world full of empires where the whole world has already been colonized. I want to zoom in and focus just on Europe. You have a couple of really big key players here. England has a huge empire. France has a huge empire. Germany has a huge empire. The Empire of Austria-Hungary has lots of land, as does an empire we've only mentioned in passing, the Ottoman Empire. It's kind of an area that we would now call the modern Middle East. In this country right here, we now call Turkey. Either way, you've got a bunch of empires. Even the Russians have their own empire at this point in time. And these empires are going to find themselves on a crash course for war. Why? Because, let's not forget, they've been competing all this time for resources around the world, and they've carved up most of the world. There's no place left to go. So we're going to start to see a kind of a push as more and more and more of these countries, they've got nowhere else to expand. They have to figure out a new way to survive. So let's start with ideas. The first big idea we need to understand is the country of Germany. Germany wants to unite all German-speaking people. Well, what's the big idea about that, right? They have their own freaking country, right? Zippity-doo-dah. Why do they have to worry about uniting even more people? And, and the answer there is that there's actually a good number of German people who don't live in Germany. There are German people who live here in the east coast of France, or the eastern part of France, and there are many Germans who live here in what we would now call Poland. But they're not part of the German Empire. Germany wants to include them in their empire, but those other countries, the Russian Empire, which has the Germans here, and the French Empire, which has the Germans here, they don't want to give that up. So understandably, they're going to object when Germany starts to make claims that the German people in France and in Russia should belong in Germany. That's reason one. Reason two. An arms race begins in Europe. As these different empires become stronger and stronger and stronger around the world, they start to compete more and more and more with each other, particularly when it comes to who's going to be able to maintain the strength of their empire over time. This map shows millions of dollars in spending on the military in American dollars for years leading up to the war. And what I want you to see is that in every instance, nations are increasing the amount they spend on preparing for war. From $308 million in 1908 to $368 million in 1913. $248 million for France in 1908 to $321 million. 84 to 193. 396 to 573, 133 to 206. And you can see it. I mean, you can see the dramatic rise in spending in all of these countries throughout Europe. This is dangerous because when you have an arms race, it creates competition. And at some point, the tensions between these countries rise because the bigger Germany builds its army, the larger France will build its army. And when you have two nations fighting over who should live in what country, and you have these large armies, if somebody makes a wrong move, we could end up with war. When you add in the fact that all the major empires of the world are doing this at the same time, it's going to get really, really, really stressful. It's going to become even more stressful for the countries of the world because what you're going to be seeing here are those countries in the world beginning to ally with each other. Specifically, what you're going to see in terms of allies are two groups of allies moving forward. One of them is going to be called the actual allies. Those countries here, in kind of the gray area that I'll be coloring in, become what we know as the allies. Those are the big three. There's three big allies. The others become known as the Central Powers. And the Central Powers include those here that you see that I'm coloring in this orange color. Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire. Those countries together will start to take what you can really call sides. They'll be on the same team together, and their goal is to protect each other. So if somebody attacks Russia, then Britain and France will help them out as the allies. If somebody attacks Austria-Hungary, then Germany and the Ottoman Empire will help as the Central Powers. So we have nations of the world very powerful taking sides. We have nations of the world very powerful, dramatically increasing their military. And we have nations of the world, huge empires, getting into arguments about who should live where, particularly when it comes to the Germans. So we've got a lot of potential sparks to ignite a powder keg here, and that's exactly what's going to happen.